Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for World Tourism Day, September 27, 2023 already. When we start a presentation at Royal Roads University, we find it very important to acknowledge the traditional lands that we're on. So if you know the indigenous lands you're joining us from, please enter it in the chat. And Royal Roads University campus is located on the traditional land of the Lagwagan and Kosapsan families and nations, also known as the Sunhi and Esquimalt. So it's with deep gratitude that we learn, work, play, love, where the past, present, and future of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people come together. We have such a beautiful panel today, so I'm very excited to share the space with you for about 90 minutes together. So the speakers today, we have Dr. Eugene Thomlinson, that is joining us from Australia, who was the former program head of the School of Tourism and Hospitality here at Royal Roads University. We have Kyla Egan, that is 4VI Director of Sustainability. We have Gail Scott from the District of Sooke, Community Economic Development Officer. Gail also has tons of experience in tourism and hospitality. Ken Bailey, who represents the board chair for Tourism Cowichan, and also the general manager at Malahat SkyWalk. And we have Denise Stys-Norman, executive director at Tourism Ucluelet. And as you'll hear, everyone has a lot of experience in the industry from early days to right now. So I hope you can all learn from them and with them during the presentation. And myself, I am Nancy Prevost-Maurice. I'm a work integrated learning framework developer with the Career Learning and Development Center at Royal Roads University. I'm with the institution for 5 years, and I'm also studying the Master of Arts in Climate Action Leadership. And my background is tourism and hospitality. I studied in Quebec 25 years ago. So it's very with deep gratitude and passion that I'm joining both sectors today in this presentation. So we'll get going with Mentimeter. And here we go. I'll share the Mentimeter so people can let us know, what does sustainability mean to you? And then we'll start our discussion with our panelists. And I'll show you the question again. That's the question we'll discuss today. So thank you for joining us.
Yes. Thanks.
Sorry about that. 41 responses. Thank you. So we have circular economy.
After this session, I might get you, Nancy, to send me just this particular screen, because a lot of the things that are being mentioned here are many of the things that the class, the sustainability course, will be talking about. So it's great to see people's perspectives right now.
And I love that someone mentioned, totally, yeah.
And at the end of the course, I may get people to do the same thing and see whether or not any of these comments, if they've changed.
%. And I saw that someone is writing people, planet, prosperity. And this is, as we know, the World Tourism Day theme this year. It's investing in people, planet. Very interesting, yeah. Anything surprising for you?
I feel like the students know so much more than I did when I was a student.
I love it. Thank you. So yeah, I'll make sure to send this this slide to everyone here. And yeah, so maybe we can get started with that first question, and I'll add it to the chat so we can see all your beautiful faces here. So what does sustainability mean to your organization? And I know when we met last week, we discussed even moving beyond sustainability to regenerative tourism, restorative as well. So I don't know who wants to get us started.
I'll go first, Nancy. Sustainability for the district Sooke is looking at everything that we do as a municipality and ensuring that it aligns with our climate action plans. We've set a very, very high level action plan with some pretty significant targets by 2030. So when I'm looking at working with the community from a business development point of view, community development point of view, or a tourism development point of view, everything has to align to bring it within that climate action plan. So sustainability is ensuring that we have the type of community that our citizens want for the future, that we're not leaving any kind of a footprint that we can't accept. And it's also working with various First Nations in our area from an inclusivity point of view and learning from them their perspective on sustainability. And it is very much focused on the land and water.
Do you want me to go, Nancy? I think
Yeah,
that
go for it.
for ourselves, for SkyWalk and some of the other projects I've been involved with, we take a little bit a different tact because because governments tend to have larger plans and things like that, and which makes sense. But when you sort of float that down to individual enterprises and things like that, there's not necessarily always the people resource to put to planning, or there's not necessarily always the budget that sits in a sustainable climate action plan use. But I think for us it always especially for the SkyWalk itself, it became about for us, sustainability was our one of our core values is to make nature accessible to people. Because we know that most of the world live in urban environments and never have an opportunity to explore. And for a lot of people, being on the SkyWalk or just walking on a nature path in a district would probably be about as wild as they get. And that's probably about as much wilderness as they're comfortable with. And so for us, it's always been about making those hard to reach places, not the iconic places and things like that, not from an Instagram perspective, but from a sustainable, perspective, but making areas that people wouldn't necessarily otherwise have access to, give them access to it in an inclusive, fully accessible, and land first kind of approach. Because we're always, when you're developing these things, you're always going to have an impact on the surrounding territory. As soon as you invite cars, as soon as you invite food and beverage, as soon as you invite things like tickets and things like that, you're always going to have an impact on it. So it's always our approach is always to make sure we're doing it in a sustainable format, and doing it in an inclusive format, because we believe that the more people you give access to the natural setting, the more people are going to be able to connect with the natural setting, the more they're going to be inclined to go home and protect it in whatever way they can, because it's going to be, in British Columbia specifically, we have an opportunity to make such an impact on the world from what we do around our sustainable practices and things like that. But at the end of the day, we also have to be careful not to be too preachy, because we also have natural resource extraction and things of that nature. So it's always about that balance, and understanding that we will have an impact. But to Gail's point, we need to make sure that whatever that impact is sustainable, and that we're giving back as much as we're taking out.
Thanks.
And I'll follow up with from Ken and Gail on that point. From a destination management perspective, originally it was really about driving business to a community that was heavily resource-based. Ucluelet still does have some commercial logging and fishing taking place in the area, but that conversation has really changed over the last 12 years. And where our focus is shifted, opposed to just having the traditional head and bed model, is more about really balance within the community, because without the locals loving where they live, it really does also deteriorate just the fabric of why for Ucluelet is so special. Like, we live in a rainforest. We have to have that balance with the nature around us. We need to know how to live with active wildlife in the area, as well as educating consumers coming to the area about why it is so important to maintain where it is that we live, and why it, like, caring when you come here, also, what that does, not just from an environmental standpoint of impacting, but also just from a community standpoint, because our community is ready to share the area with consumers to keep our economic development and all of our businesses that have opened over the last 10 years viable, so our locals also have some place to enjoy. So it really does, for us, it really does come down to education of the consumer, bringing the right consumer to the area who understands and appreciates why we're trying to focus and protect what we have. And if anything, this past summer has really highlighted why it continues to be so important for us.
Kyla.
Yes. So I work at 4VI, which is the regional DMO for Vancouver Island. Maybe I'll start with social entrepreneurship, because I saw that on the slide. So about 18 months ago, we decided to become a social enterprise. Now, traditionally, DMOs are often not-for-profit organizations. At the regional level, they receive core funding from Destination British Columbia every year. What we decided to do is to keep that not-for-profit branch, but also add in a for-profit branch. And essentially what we do is offer consulting services, and then the surplus from the services we reinvest into innovative projects within the Vancouver Island region. So last year, from the surplus of our services, we paid for the destination carbon audit of Vancouver Island, and climate action plan. This was the first destination carbon audit done in North America. We felt it was important to do in order to make evidence-based decisions around where we invest our time and energy and funds when it came to climate action. However, we also take a holistic view of sustainability, so that includes social, economic, and environmental. On the social side, we've recently really invested in gender equity. We had a report come out 2 weeks ago that looked at the state of gender equity in Vancouver Island's tourism industry. We've also created a podcast in the last year called Indigenous Voices of Vancouver Island. You can check that out on Spotify, Apple Music. We worked with Indigenous entrepreneurs from across the island to tell their story and vision around tourism. And I'm currently working on the second season of that podcast, and it'll focus on First Nations communities and their vision for tourism on the island. And then a third project I might mention is, in really practical terms, we want businesses on the island to try and transition their operations to a more sustainable framework. And so we offer a program called the Biosphere Commitment Program, and it essentially offers free sustainable action planning, education, and funds to help transition businesses so that they can more heavily invest in environmental, social, and economic programs. But over the past 18 months, I think we've done about 30 projects in this space. So been quite a lot and quite a vast array. But for the time being, climate action, reconciliation, and gender equity are really our big three.
Thank you, everyone. Lots that being discussed there, lots of, I guess, doors being opened in the discussion. One of the things I wanted to, I guess, come back to, Gail, you mentioned about the climate action plans and the targets, and then you just mentioned it again, Kyla. Just wanted to get from Denise and Ken about the role of action plans or planning in the whole process for sustainability.
The District of Ucluelet did create a climate action plan just prior to COVID, which included also some just bare bones flood mapping information as well, just so we could understand what the impacts would look like to the community. But from a DMO perspective, our climate action, we participate with the District of Ucluelet on the climate action plan, as well as the 10-year tourism master plan that we just developed with them last year. And in those in both of those plans, we've tried to pull out key areas where we know that we can support small business who are looking at improving their footprints. It really does come down to education of the visitor and of businesses, the staff in general. For us, it really comes together in a way that we are in a supportive position to sort of tease out what makes sense from a DMO perspective, and then pass that information on to our small businesses. Also showing the community that we're trying to also participate in ensuring a healthy community long term, because the conversations of over-tourism have been very front and center all over the world, on the West Coast. And so for us, we really take that seriously, because really without having a healthy community, we don't have a healthy tourism sector. We don't have a healthy just like the environment and nature around us. And so we're really trying to find our place within those key pieces that the district and its partners have identified as climate action focus for us, and just trying to execute that. We're starting a new with this change in June. We've just started a sustainability committee with our board of directors, as well as some key strategic partners within the community to sort of help us kind of find some key areas that we can further support and focus on, not just in business development, but also housing and equitable wages for businesses and those sorts of topics. So
nice.
Yeah, sure. So
I guess plans for you guys.
Yeah, so my answer is sort of twofold. Excuse me. One is more from a day-to-day practical. We don't necessarily, as a business, we haven't created a climate action plan, because we follow the CBRD plan, and then we're also starting to get very involved with the biosphere program that Kyla had mentioned, that we had just become aware of a couple of weeks ago. So there's lots of as far as the overall climate action planning process, there are a lot of different ideas and initiatives out there, and I think it's important to sort of understand what initiative relates to us, because you can really get overwhelmed with everything that's out there right now, and there's a lot of information and a lot of good things happening. You just need to understand what's the best thing for your organization. And so I think that this year we instituted water restrictions on ourselves, as an example, because for the first time, the CBRD, which is the Cowichan Valley Regional District, for just to explain the acronyms, because we have a lot of acronyms in this industry, but the CBRD is our sort of governing body. And for the first time, I've been here for 5 years working on this project. For the first time in 5 years, we actually got a water restrictions advisory. We live in a part of Vancouver Island that can tend to be very dry in the summer, but this is the first summer we actually got an advisory. So that prompted us to look at our water usage and things of that nature. But but a lot of the larger planning around climate action, we follow the lead of organizations like 4VI, CVRD, organizations like that. What we do from a practical perspective, on a day-to-day basis, is one of the things we've done is we've spent literally weeks and weeks and weeks every spring eradicating Scotch broom. So for somebody that is not from Vancouver Island, Scotch broom is this incredibly invasive species that completely takes over all of the natural vegetation and things like that. We've spent 4 years going through our site and eradicating as much Scotch broom or non-native blackberry bushes, that sort of thing, and replanting them with native species to try and give the native species a chance to come back. That's, so as an example, we've probably planted somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,500 trees. We tried to plant Gary oaks, which are extremely hard to bring back, but very unique to our part of the world. We've got arbutus nursery trees all over the site. We've replanted Douglas fir. We also recognize that our cedars. It's interesting because Denise mentioned the rainforest, and unfortunately, we might have at one point in our history been deemed a bit of a rainforest as well. And we're literally watching the climate change in front of us. And I would not say that we're any sort of a rainforest anymore. If you look at the trees like the red cedars and things like that rely on that weather pattern, we're seeing cedars die away and Douglas fir take over because they're just a hardier tree. Not to get into sort of too much of the tree geek stuff, but that's really climate action. Like we're seeing the results of the impact, the negative impact on our climate in our trees, and that happens over a generation. But so from a just to answer your question, Eugene, on a practical day to day, those are the kinds of things we're looking at. We're looking at planting things that are drought resistant, but also native to Vancouver Island. We're looking at eradicating the things that don't. So I mean, outside of the normal sort of recycling and that sort of thing, our sustainability is really about also getting some of our Malahat Nation community members to explain to the staff about the way they used to garden, right? The way they used to grow things and harvest things in different seasons and things like that. So it becomes, there's an element of education as well, and just sharing, past historical ideas and initiatives and things like that.
Thanks, Ken. Gail, you were talking previously about these climate action plans, and I imagine you're working with the community a lot, and it's been mentioned a few times already. I guess, what level of understanding is there about sustainability and their involvement? How do you get people involved, and I guess as interested as yourself in sustainability and developing in these plans?
You're absolutely right. There's so many different perceptions of what sustainability is. I know that I'm working currently with Royal Roads University School of Tourism, and I have 2 students that are working with the district of Sooke. And one of the projects we're working on is identifying what the new type of sustainability, climate action strategies we could adopt to bring into this new regional destination management plan we're putting together. First thing one of the students said to us was, "What do you mean by sustainability? It's such a huge word, and there's so many different understandings of what it is." And Ken and I were talking just last week, and we said, you know what, we should throw that buzzword out, because it is a buzzword, and there's so many different perceptions of what it means. You can tell just by looking at that first slide with all the students' input. And it incorporates so much, just about everything. We really narrowed it down to saying It's responsibility for your actions, responsible practices that you incorporate into your everyday planning, your everyday living, so that you can see that your community will have a future, a long future, one that will be smart growth and one that will be a growth that will still be around for our grandchildren and our their grandchildren. So really what we're doing is, in anything that we develop now, and this regional tourism destination marketing plan that we're looking at will go all the way up the Juan de Fuca Strait. And it's such a beautiful area. It is a rainforest that meets the sea. And what we're trying to do is look at everything globally. We've provided these students just about every report we can possibly come up with. We've also included our Capital Regional District Sustainability Plan. They're also currently looking at that sustainability plan for all the municipalities, and it's being updated. I think it was dated back 2017. So with the change that's happening because of the wildfires, the floods, and everything else, we are I think every level of government is looking at their current sustainability plans and saying, I think we need to have some new adaptation strategies brought into it. So that said, this project that we're currently working on, and I will mention, we are working on it with 4VI and Destination BC. They have been absolutely incredibly supportive of the regional focus. We're not silo focused anymore. We do have a Sooke Tourism Association, and even they are now building their own climate action plan that will support the type of tourism activities that they deliver on. So it's all coming together from all different levels, right? From a community level, a municipal level, a provincial level, federal level, and an international level. There's only so much you can do, and it's not going to be a fix overnight. So we're taking it in stages, saying what are the doable things that we know we can do in the next, say, 3 to 5 years, and incorporating that into our plan. Then we'll have future stages that we can be looking at. So that's kind of where we're at. We know the whole world is changing, and we know that tourism will have to comply with that.
Thanks.
Eugene, can I just add a comment to Gail's?
Sure.
I just think there's two things that Gail said that I think is very important. And one is the only way we get there is through collaboration. And we many of us as organizations and as businesses need to drop the egos and work together collaboratively, because it's the only way because none of our our natural environment and our micro ecosystems and things like that, they don't operate on their own. They operate in collaboration with the ecosystems around them. And I think that's an extremely important point to be able to achieve what we're trying to achieve. And I think the other thing that Gail said that I kind of alluded to as well is this is a big task that was generations in the making, and it's going to take generations to fix. And I think it's important for all of us to sort of be able to do our own part, working collaboratively with the other organizations that are doing their part.
Well, and I guess that, kind of leads into Kyla and all of the terrific things that you've been doing and that 4VI have been doing. A lot of groundbreaking things that you're talking about. How have you brought all of these different ideas and everything together? And what keeps you going, given that we are talking about a real time span and that things are going to take a lot of time?
I've been really encouraged by the change that I've seen in the industry in the last 3 years. I've been working in the responsible tourism industry for a decade now, and it's like we're in this period of transformation that I haven't seen before. Echoing Gail's comments, all of a sudden there seems to be a certain amount of momentum at different layers of the tourism ecosystem. I think 18 months ago, when we decided to really get into climate action and adaptation, that was fairly unusual for a DMO to take on. But in that time period, I've seen a huge amount of change with community DMOs and other community partners, all the way up to the provincial scale. And so on that piece on collaboration, what encourages me on a day-to-day basis is that I'm seeing this change constantly and very quickly. I was writing a speech the other day for a conference, and I had gone through all our different projects and the impacts that they had had. And then at the end, I was saying, in the past 18 months, and then I stopped and I went, 18 months, like 18 months, we've made this amount of change. If we keep that momentum going, it's going to be unbelievable what we can accomplish in the next 5 years. And I would say generally, of course, climate action and sustainability is a very divisive topic, but I would say generally, we're very fortunate in the Vancouver Island region. I think there is a culture of sustainability that exists here within our residents, our visitors, our community partners. And I think we can really become almost like a solutions lab for testing these programs and initiatives and finding solutions for what can work at the local level.
Well, and Denise,
yes,
with the various partners that you're working with out in Ucluelet, how are you finding, I guess, the acceptance of sustainability, of tourism, of bringing all of those different partners together?
I think, we're pretty fortunate just in general as to where we reside, because a lot of, from community to business members, everybody is very sustainably focused because they do recognize the unique area in which we live. So I feel from a community standpoint, that tends to be in the foreground of everybody's mindsets. Our both districts a few years ago adopted bylaws about removing single-use plastics before it became a larger conversation across the province. And while some of our strategic partners are Parks Canada, District of Tofino, Tourism Tofino, as well as the regional district, everybody's in different layers of where their goals are and what they need to achieve for their own organization. But we all collectively come together and say, how do we do this as a whole to really preserve what it is that people come out here to experience and find so special? And I think that that's always been a mindset out here, is to share, but also to respect and really learn from our Indigenous communities, and then understand why it's been preserved, how it's been preserved for so long, and really integrate some of those teachings out here as well to consumers, because we are a popular tourism destination, and without what we have here, we are unable to bring more people to the area and have the community sustain itself just in those types of capacities. So I think we're quite fortunate, because the base foundation has always been here. What we're doing now is we're really amplifying it forward more, just to remind people about why it is so special to respect the area that you come to, and our strategic partners also have those same mindsets as well. So it comes from everything from approving business licenses and what's being built out here, to what restaurants are serving locally, to supporting and making sure that the trails are healthy for locals as well as visitors. So it really is a holistic approach that we have out here for sure. And then of course, and I haven't even had a chance to mention, but even working, and before I forget, working with 4VI, they have really been instrumental in helping Tourism Ucluelet really push forward some boundaries and some conversations that we've wanted to have as a DMO. And that really has set us on a different path of focus on how we even just attract consumers to the area and support our businesses as well.
Thanks. And as a very quick side point, just to let you know, Kyla, I've been praising up 4VI on the other side of the pond down here too. So if you start getting requests coming from Australia, you'll know where that's coming from.
Well, I had the funniest thing pop up the other day. I was at a virtual event that had many Australians in it, and we were talking about reconciliation. And I just off the cuff said, "Oh yeah, we made this podcast." And about half of the group goes, "Oh yeah, we've listened to it." And I couldn't believe it, that it had reached the other side of the world. It was really a surreal moment. So I think maybe part of that's already starting to sink in.
For sure. Just being very aware of the time. As much as I'd love to keep diving into this sort of information, I know some of the students are going to be interested in, I guess, where are the opportunities for them? The four of you have kind of talked about lots of different areas and lots of things that are going on. And I don't know if I see the mics off are open for Kyla, so if you want to start, but where do you see the opportunities for the students?
So if you're interested particularly in sustainable tourism, investing in more technical skills around sustainable tourism is in high demand right now. Many of the environmental consulting firms are over capacity, and increasingly more businesses and community partners are looking for people to fulfill their sustainability roles. Some of those more technical skills are trying to figure out how to do sustainable action planning, how to make the business case for sustainability, and that includes costing and operations. Another one would be aware of the various certifications that exist and how they can be applied to different businesses. Another one that I did particularly is I took a carbon accounting certification, which was incredibly helpful in my climate action work and was a much sought after skill. So developing those harder skills that can help support your passion for sustainable tourism, it's in huge demand right now, and I can't overstate how important it would be.
Others on the panel, where do you see the opportunities? Where do you see these doors being opened for the students, or doors that they have to open themselves?
I'd like to speak to that. We have an excellent example I could share. But before we get into that, I'm going to just say that I started out my career with an economic development degree. Back then, and again, because of the color of hair, you're going to know, it was all about chasing big corporate companies and trying to get them interested into moving into your community. As time went on, community economic development became such a more important way of looking at working with community and growing it. And I'm 100% believer in CED. So I was one of the persons that got to actually adjudicate an online program with the University of Calgary in CED. And so that's going back, I don't know, 15 years ago. And now the way I look at everything and the partners I work with, the relationships I develop, is all looking at community economic development, which is more sustainable. You're looking at the social side of it, the economic side of it, the community side of it, and the environmental side of it. But it wasn't that long ago when I was attending a couple of conferences, and I noticed the tourism industry was saying, we're not part of economic development. We're our own industry. We're our own separate industry. My argument was always, no, you're not. You're all part of the industry sectors. And tourism does not stand alone. What I've seen in the last 5 years is tourism is no longer saying they stand alone. They're a very huge part of community economic development. And what the example I want to show you or demonstrate to you is let's take a student that is graduating from University of Royal Roads, and they have a tourism MBA. That tourism MBA can be transferable into an economic development position, a community economic development position, and vice versa. In fact, one of the more strategic partners that I'm working with is a young fellow who just graduated from Royal Roads University with his MBA in tourism. And he was part of my partnership in building this regional Juan de Fuca destination marketing area or management area. Just informed me that he got offered the position of director of community economic development with Port Alberni. I was so sad from one side because he's been such a great partner in trying to build this very big concept and making sure we get people to understand it's better to be regional than a silo. But on the other hand, I'm very happy for him. He's taken that tourism MBA and he has been able to broaden that to become more of a community economic development position in which tourism will be a very big part of it. And he's very happy with the new position.
Yes, and he is one of our MATM graduates. So thanks for talking about him and the program. Ken or Denise?
Sure, I can.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Denise.
Okay. I think I think from a destination management perspective, and Tourism Ucluelet is a very small DMO. And so I feel like while there are similarities across the board, what we can offer and how my position translates to something in, say, Victoria or Parksville or Nanaimo or Vancouver is very different because the level of responsibility is different. And so from a small rural community standpoint, I do feel that you need to be open and almost come in a bit of a jack of all trades position. Obviously, having a degree really builds that foundation for you and gives you a lot of solid understanding of the ecosystem in tourism. But I think it's also being open to learning from other perspectives as well, because my journey to this position was very different. I've worked in hospitality and tourism. I've worked in event planning. I've worked in healthcare research. But all of those pieces of information have compiled to me being able to navigate conversations with individuals, build partnerships and relationships with our district, our neighboring communities. And that really is, from a small rural DMO standpoint, you need to be able to navigate multiple streams. It's not just focusing down one particular path. And I do echo, what Gail was saying is that you do come in and there is a large economic component to the position because you're effectively responsible for making sure that the businesses that have opened in this community are successful because they're small business owners. We have no corporate companies out here. So they're all individuals who have put their own money on the line to start and create a passion for themselves. And so you carry that responsibility to make sure that they are supported throughout the year. And they in turn provide employment to locals in the area. And so from a DMO standpoint, especially when tourism is the largest component in that community, you really have to look at all of the different facets of how you navigate that conversation and how you build your brand and organization over time, because it's not just one singular path. It really is about relationships. It really is about supporting the community as a whole. And again, like this is coming just from it's myself. I have a creative manager and some staff out at the visitor center. So we are a very small team. And so it really does play very differently from us compared to, say, even Tofino up the road. Like their staff is twice the size of ours, and even their level of responsibility is still slightly different because their communities do have slightly different needs than ours, even though we are both we're 40 kilometers apart from one another, and we do partner together. So it coming in from this kind of position, in a small rural community, it is very different for sure.
Definitely. Ken, opportunities for students.
Yeah, just to follow on what Denise said, I mean, many tourism organizations are fairly small in the makeup of business sizes. There aren't very many corporations when it comes to tourism. Maybe some of the hotel chains, companies like Pursuit, things like that. So the willingness to sort of roll up your sleeves and try everything in tourism will get you a long way. Not necessarily never saying no, but being open to the fact that, even though you might be a master's student that's coming in and working for a small organization, you might be asked to do things that possibly you haven't done in a long time, like sell tickets or, those types of things, because that's the survival of small tourism organizations. So I agree with Denise that you have to come in with a very open mind when it comes to working on the private side or the small DMO side. The second piece, the second part of my sort of answer, and this is coming from, working with Indigenous communities, is I get asked by my staff often, what can we do for Malahat Nation? What can we do? I'd like to do this. I'd like to do this. And, that sort of thing. And my answer is always the same. Did you ask them what they would like? And so, what I would say to the group from the Indigenous sustainability and relationship perspective is we have to be careful not to pontificate around ideas about what we think the Indigenous communities would like. It's very important for us to go to them and ask them, what would they like? What do they need? They might say nothing. They might not be ready for, us to help them. And I think that's, from an Indigenous, because our Indigenous relationship building and trust building is also a huge part of this industry being able to move forward in a sustainable and successful format. And there are countries around the world that are poised to be able to build off of that. We're one of them. And British Columbia within Canada is one of them that's, I believe, well positioned. We've got a long way to go, don't get me wrong, but we're well positioned in being able to work with our Indigenous communities and build the visitor economy in a more holistic and beneficial way for everybody. But I think that, I guess in closing, what I would say is the key is to go to whatever community you're in and ask them. It might be something as simple as volunteering in the childcare, center. It might be helping them, on a cleanup day, those types of things. It may not necessarily be what we think they need. The key is ask them what they would like. How can we help them? And approach it in that way.
Thanks.
Eugene, I'd just like to add one more thing. One of the partnerships that we're working with is a brand new organization. It's less than a year since it was launched, and it's called Indigenous Prosperity Partnership Center. It falls under the umbrella of the South Island Prosperity Partnership. And for us, while we're building this regional approach to a destination management area along the Juan de Fuca Strait, it's so important for us to have that connection with the Indigenous Partnership program. She will bring in all of the understanding that we need to incorporate into this bigger plan and make sure that we have listened to our First Nations and that we are adopting some of our First Nations approaches to sustainable tourism. So I'd just like to add that in. I would not walk down this road without involving her and the whole organization that she represents. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, she represents 8 different First Nation communities just along that Wanda-Pipa Strait area.
Thanks, Gail. I'd love to, I guess, keep going on this as well, but I want to get to some of the questions that the students have posed. And I guess starting off with Autumn had a question about any sustainability boards or possibly any organizations that the students can be a part of, that they can join. Can they, volunteer with some of you guys maybe?
I can speak from a tourism Cowichan perspective. We have, and we mentioned this at our AGM, we would be happy to have a student on our board to learn, how it works and things like that. It's difficult to, to get to that student that might be interested. And that's sort of where we always, I think where we always run into the hurdle. But just for transparency's sake, for everybody to understand, Tourism Cowichan actually hires 4VI to do all of our marketing, our governance, all that sort of thing, because we're a very small tourism organization and we're board driven. We don't have any paid staff per se. And so a lot of times we connect with Kenzie or Brian, excuse me, at 4VI to help us with that. But from a DMO, from a DMO perspective, but from a board perspective, we would be happy to have a student board member on our board, probably a non-voting, but it would, it would help that student understand, the inner workings of a board in tourism.
And just to echo Ken, so 4VI does a lot of board governance training, and something that we've learned through working with different communities is that a lot of board members right now are retiring, and a lot of communities are needing new faces to help replace them. And so if you can seek out a bit of board training, and then I'm sure if you start approaching many community boards, they'd be happy to have you. It's a great opportunity, and there's a lot of it out there right now.
Yes, I'd also agree. I know that our Sooke Regional Tourism Association, and I also know the Port Renfrew Tourism Task Force, they have a capacity issue. It's all volunteer based. There's not a lot of funding to support it. So capacity is always an issue. Having a university tourism student on their boards would be an excellent opportunity. What I'm finding though, when I talk, and I do work quite a bit with Royal Roads, I've got 2 different projects going on, one on food security and one on tourism development, sustainable climate action, tourism adaptation strategies. But what I was about to say was, the students are saying, you're out in the rural community. You're so hard to get to. And it is a challenge. I realize that. We are rural. And for a lot of students, they don't either have transportation, or it's coming into a real rural area they don't understand. That's the only negative part about being out in the wild West Coast, is it is harder for students when they're attached to a university to make their way out to our communities. But we welcome them. I know that Sooke Region Tourism Association would be standing up saying, pick me first, because they truly, truly need more capacity building within their organization. Bringing a fresh perspective from a youth tourism point of view would be so welcomed.
And I'd like to just follow up on that as well. As I mentioned, we are a very small organization, and we do have a lot of ideas and plans of how we'd like to move forward. And so, I'm happy to, if anybody has suggestions or ideas, we do have a board. Our board is a board of 10. We have a position for the district of Ucluelet. Our mayor currently resides on that. We also have a spot for the Ucluelet government as well, but we do also have non-voting representatives. We are also looking at launching projects. So if there are students who may think that they're find something in our 10-year tourism master plan, or that they think that they might want to either research, participate on, there's always those opportunities with us as well. And because of where we live, there are tons of opportunities to participate with Surfrider, with the Redfish Foundation, the aquarium out here. They're all, they all have a tourism component to it, especially Redfish, which is salmon enhancement, and then the Ucluelet Aquarium as well. And they are marquee organizations. The Wild Pacific Trail Society, as an example, is all not-for-profit. They usually have seasonal staff, but they're always looking for new board members, and they have a very strong stewardship-led mandate. And so any perspectives that you may have in regards to that could always be an opportunity for you as well. I'd say all of our boards out here, except for possibly 2, are volunteer based, and everyone is keen to make sure that they have a voice with a different perspective in order to keep on moving forward. So anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to connect them to organizations or anything along those lines too. So
this might be a situation of be careful what you wish for.
I know. I just realized when I came out of my mouth, I was like, that's okay though. It's okay.
I could see every one of the students connecting up with the 4 of you and getting an avalanche, which would be a good thing, but an avalanche of requests or connections. And I guess echoing your point, Gail, yes, it might be a bit more work and Denise to get to some of these other places, but it's definitely worth the effort. And kind of echoing some of the general comments from the 4 of you, you really get a broad perspective of skills and experiences with some of these smaller organizations, because you do tend to be that jack of all trades. You do get a bit of experience. One day, maybe you're doing marketing stuff. The next day, you're doing visitor services, and then you're doing a podcast possibly, or something like that. So there's a real range of opportunities for the students when they do go to some of the smaller communities or smaller areas. So definitely get out there. Just also wanting to touch back on another student question here. And again, this could be to any one of you. Calandra asked about, how do you get that conversation started? Especially, or maybe sometimes where there isn't that interest, or maybe that understanding of sustainability. How do you start the conversation about sustainability? Go for it, Denise.
Oh, I was just going to say, we've just had this conversation, and 4VI actually helped us kind of navigate that conversation. We had started it during COVID. And I think it really is just taking stock of what for us, what the surrounding community was asking and what we were observing was happening, and really saying, how do we get this started? And I think because sustainability is such a large, and regenerative tourism is such a large area to focus, it is extremely overwhelming. For us, it was finding what suited best from a DMO perspective versus what was good for a small business. So Synergy Enterprises runs programs for businesses to move in a more sustainable path, whereas the Travel Foundation had a strong focus on DMO support. And so for us, we found that path and their framework and the education that they were offering that was more suitable for us. But they always reminded us to take small steps, because it is so overwhelming. It's just taking it and finding those key people who are willing to work with you, and just saying, this is what and for us, it was, this is what we want to do. how do we take this down so it's not overwhelming? How do we support our businesses who want to do this? And so what my sustainability committee is going to be doing this fall is we're just starting with a simple survey to get an idea of where all of our businesses are. And then we're going to start introducing, you know, if there's workshops and interests of education and those types of things, because we know that we can't solve all the problems here, but it's more about an individual business and helping them navigate what suits them the best, because everybody's journey is so different.
Go for it, Kyla.
Yeah. In very practical terms, there's 3 methods that I use to talk to stakeholders who might not be fully in on sustainability. The first is that I lead with the social and economic sustainable development goals rather than the environmental. So I talk about, and I don't necessarily use the word sustainability. I'll talk about inclusive economic growth, and decent work, no poverty, quality education. I first learned this when I was doing rural community development work, and many of them were natural resource extraction dependent, and the word sustainability just like freaked them out. And so I would often talk about social and economic sustainable development goals, and most people were on board to that right away. The second piece that I use if I'm talking about the environment and climate action is I use connecting stories. So for example, and I use this from climate scientist Patty Martin, who works in Oregon, but when she's speaking with kind of the good old boys out in the country, she'll go, when you were salmon fishing 30 years ago, how big were the salmon? And they go, they're huge. How big are they now? And then they'd say, oh, they're smaller. And that's a connecting story for them to understand that climate action and sustainability is real and happening right now within their own experience, because often data and statistics just doesn't resonate with people. And then the third thing that I do is talk about the business case of sustainability. I talk about the benefits that has to businesses' operations, that employees are more likely to be satisfied and that retention is likely to improve. I also, when I'm speaking with communities, the benefits that it can hold for them as an organization, how it can help benefit their stakeholders, and how it can help benefit their residents. And I find at the end of those conversations, if you're kind of focused on practical implementation and the benefits that it can bring, most people are along for the ride once you kind of use those methods to talk about it, rather than coming all in with sustainability and climate action and stewardship. There's other ways that you can talk about these issues that feel more reasonable to people who might be neutral or kind of on the edge.
Right. Ken.
I would go back to Denise's comments and I mean Kyla's approach. I've written it all down because I just learned some things from her. So but I you know I'm on the same page as Denise, is that you can't talk about sustainability. You need to, you know, I think you need to find what resonates, and this is a little bit on what Kyla said. You need to find what resonates with your particular community, the particular area that you're living in or trying to have an impact on, and focus on that first, and then, you know, fill the puddle from the middle out sort of thing, because it's such a broad topic and means different things to different people, that you have to boil it down to what resonates with your particular, you know, community. And then, because, you know, and I think Kyla even mentioned it with the salmon. I mean, you know, if you're in a place like Ucluelet, that conversation is completely different than rural Alberta, because those people are approaching their day-to-day, you know, at the end of the day, we're all more alike than we are different, but depending on where you live, you're approaching that sustainability conversation differently. And what resonates with you is going to be different.
Right. Well, and Gail, how have you started some of those conversations over the years?
Well, one of the things I think we haven't mentioned here today yet is a partnership with the BC Hospitality Association. Now, when we were talking about connecting some of the students to learning opportunities, perhaps if the Royal Roads University were to develop a stronger partnership with the BC Hospitality Association, what you could be doing is linking your students up with various different resorts, hotels. They all have a need to start creating an education program for the visitors coming in on how they wish to lessen their footprint. So those are some of the ways that I've even been thinking of podcasts in which you are able to involve the hospitality industry, the resort industry, the tourism product activity operators, and saying, what can we do to help you develop a visitor economy education program that lessens the footprint? And so that way, all of us are trying to meet a climate action sustainability goal.
Well, I guess talking with Kyla about podcasts would probably be a place to start there. So, you've all kind of talked about this, and one of the students asked was about the SDGs, UN SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. But I guess not wanting to get too technical, have you brought some of those UN SDGs into your organizations? Has it played any role in some of your plans? And if yes, how? If not, why?
Sorry, Kyla, I have to go. But I just wanted to say thank you to Nancy and Eugene for having me. I've loved it, and I'm always happy to talk tourism. So, and Nancy has my contact. So,
well, and if you don't mind, we'll share it with everyone. And thank you very much for being a part of this, and watch for all of the emails from students wanting to be a part of you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
In terms of sustainable development goals, that is the framework that we use internally to help organize our projects. We are a Biosphere certified organization, and that means that we are required to implement a certain amount of projects per year that align with the sustainable development goals. Last year, we did all 17, and we actually have an 18th that focuses on reconciliation, as it's not quite in there in the Canadian context. And now we work through the Biosphere Commitment Program that I mentioned, businesses implement sustainable action plans around the SDGs, and now community DMOs as well. So I've been actually working with Ken and Tourism Cowichan to help them develop a sustainable action plan focused on the sustainable development goals. I would say it's probably the most popular framework in the local tourism industry to use around sustainability. And much of that is because it's quite holistic. It really breaks down the economic and social components as well as environmental, which makes it a little more approachable, I would say.
Okay. Go for it, Denise or Gail.
I would say for us, while we're still sort of at the beginning of our journey, even though we've always had a sustainable focus in our marketing and the way that we approach we just approach tasks and things in general within the organization. We have not gotten to that stage yet where we've fully defined which UN SDG we're going to be focusing on and pursuing. We're still at the beginning of that. So we feel like once we have at least this general temperature of where our stakeholders are in the community as a whole, we can start to compile what that looks like in a more strategic and structured way.
Well, and just very quickly to you, Denise, do you think that the going to that UN SDGs would be a help or a hindrance in some of those conversations and your work?
I can honestly say that I think it depends on how it's applied, because for what a DMO needs internally as an organization versus what we're trying to achieve as an organization are actually two different focuses. So what we're professing, for better lack of a term, or putting out there to the consumer is going to look slightly different than how we operate on a day-to-day basis internally as an like in the office, so to speak. So that I don't think that it's a hindrance by any means. I think the framework is really solid, and it really just makes you stop and think about what it is. But not all of them, some of them are challenging for us to apply because we are such a rural community. So we sort of take them and look at, we've kind of looked at each individual one and said, you know, where can we make the largest impact? Which ones are going to be the top ones that we focus on, and which ones can we acknowledge but know that we may not have a lot of movement in, just because of the nature of where we are, the resources that we have. So that's the way that we've sort of approached it in general conversation.
Right. Gail.
Yes. Our region is just starting out. Let's put it that way. We're not a DMO. We're not a regional tourism association. Metchosin doesn't even have a tourism plan. Port Renfrew just recently, in the last year, opened up a visitor information center. It just recently launched a tourism task force. So we've got this incredible Juan de Fuca Strait region that is just beginning its journey. So the first part of this is getting that regional destination management plan developed, and it will take us, it's not going to happen overnight. I would say we should have something pretty much completed and ready for adoption by, I'd say, April 2024. What we plan to do is certainly adopt a lot of the strategies that are out there. But being realistic, we are rural, very rural. And these smaller communities may not have the capacity to do some of it. So we want to pick the low-hanging fruit and incorporate that into our plan with the intention of continuing to move forward and adopt those strategies that are going to be more, maybe that's not the way to say it, but as we start out and grow and adopt, we'll be able to take on more and more of the strategies. Something that we haven't talked about today, and it's a very important thing to identify for our region, is the transportation issue. And the transportation issue is huge. We're one road in, one road out. If there was any kind of an emergency, we are in a big problematic situation. So we also know that the GHGs are our highest contributor to carbon footprint, because, believe it or not, this is going to surprise you. Being a small rural community, the Sooke region, the citizens that reside here, 80% of them travel every single day of the week, depending on what the work week is, out of the area down into the larger urban areas such as Colwood, Langford, Victoria. What we're wanting to do is grow our tourism economy, because that is our future. It is our driving economy, and create more jobs here to keep people here by helping to grow the industry. And the only way we can grow that industry is to look at incorporating climate action strategies, sustainability strategies, and grow the industry, the tourism industry, or if you want to call it a visitor economy industry, in the way that it needs to happen. That still keeps your communities rural, because they want to stay rural, but that's the situation we're in.
Right. Well, and I could see Denise smiling and laughing when you made the comment about the one road in and one road out.
Yeah. That definitely was, we truly were tested this year. And while we are grateful that Ucluelet, Port Alberni, and Tofino and our neighboring Indigenous community, like we were never in imminent danger, but the impact of having the highway closed, you know, it was about a $45 million impact at the beginning of June. And the trickle-down effect for that rolled out through the entire summer, along with the closures that ended up happening for extended periods of time, people coming down the back roads. And it really, because it wasn't just tourism businesses in general, it was fuel trucks, it was produce coming to the co-ops, it was the damage that their trucks sustained while those issues were going on. And so it becomes this bigger conversation when you literally only have one road. And, you know, Tofino and Ucluelet, I wouldn't say we were fortunate, but we had been dealing with highway closures for 4 years because of Kennedy Hill and everything that came with that massive project. So we just adapted, but you could see the impact that it was making even just on Port Alberni as a whole, because they had never been in that situation where the road was completely cut off. And so even though like the West Coast from Sutton Pass over versus Port Alberni still experienced different impacts because of the nature of what the communities needed. And so to have one road in and one road out and one road that really did the trick, but was still quite problematic, it really shined a light on how closed off we are when you run the risk of and in that case, it was a wildfire that closed off the road. And we were contending with winds and rain over the last couple of days to test that entire section of the highway. And I'm grateful to say that it did not need to close, which was fantastic. So, you know, but it, for us in a tourism capacity though, like that, and it's something to think about when it's a one road in and one road out. I've just been put on the Regional District Transportation Committee. But from a business standpoint, when somebody is looking at coming to the West Coast and says, oh, I can't even, between the ferries and the highway, I'm not even going to deal with it, that becomes a problem for us. So it becomes this unique ecosystem of trying to manage all of these different components when it does come around climate action and sustainability, because it's not just about the day-to-day, it's about all of these surrounding impacts that actually feed down to a small community or a large community for that matter. When you look at what happened in Kelowna, it's like there's so many mitigating factors that become part of your day-to-day to consider and how to navigate that moving forward. I learned a lot more this summer than I thought I ever would, especially about fluid distribution. So but it really did shine that light. So to that point about Sooke and the Wandafuka area, we did live that. So I'm happy to say the highway is fully open.
Nice to hear. I'm just being very aware of a time, and I would love to keep this conversation going for a variety of reasons. One being a very selfish one. The longer I keep chatting with you, the less that I have to teach to the students. But I just want to give you an opportunity to wrap up, and then we'll take a short break. This is to the students, and we'll meet on the Moodle shell afterwards. But last thoughts to the three of you.
I know that many of you in this group are international students, and I just wanted to touch on how valuable that is within the tourism industry to have experience in other spaces and contexts. A lot of my work is finding case studies from around the world and figuring out how they can be applied here. Having cross-cultural competencies and global context is very valuable. And I'm so excited that you're interested in coming into sustainable tourism.
Gail.
Well, because Sooke has transitioned from the old-fashioned logging and fishing basic resource industries into a tourism development industry, I think this is a huge opportunity for our young people and even those that may have decided they want to change their career and look at tourism. There's so much more than what the old-fashioned way of tourism development was all about. Kyla's been very explicit about how broad it can be and how many different areas you can go in. Right from artificial intelligence, research and development, being on the ground, being a first-hand tourism product provider, or maybe it's a consulting with the hospitality industry and the big resorts and saying, let's work together and let's find a program that we can put together that teaches our visitors how to not leave a negative footprint. So it's very broad. It's not the old-fashioned way of just saying, oh, I'm going to run a kayak business. It's much broader than that. So I know it's going to be a strong industry. We already know that the tourism industry is British Columbia's leading industry or leading economic driver, and that's not going to change in the near future.
Nice. Denise.
I think as Kyla noted, there are a lot of international students on this particular call, and I really feel that it's about learning and bringing your ideas to an area that may not have experienced something or may not be able to tap into that information, but have the need and want to learn and diversify because they know that, you know, they're following a path that works for them. And I think that it's, and again, also to Gail's point, you know, it's the tourism industry is really made up of a lot of really unique individuals that come in with really unique perspectives. And I think that's what enriches the environment in the industry that we work in, because that's what really helps mold community. And again, from a DMO standpoint, that's what really helps us mold and sort of navigate the future, because it's not this cookie cutter approach. You know, for us, each organization is different depending on what it is that their focus is, but there's a general foundation and ecosystem that we all sort of operate through. And it's taking in new information and recognizing that a different perspective may help us navigate this area that we may not have been able to touch on because we didn't know that it was available, or we didn't have the knowledge base to help us transform an idea that we had into reality. So I think so when I come back to saying about being open-minded and being a kind of jack of all trades, it really is about coming in and bringing your experience and seeing how you fit into that puzzle to help enrich and just better the organization.
Thanks. I just want to say thank you to all of you, and also a very special thanks to Nancy for organizing this. I certainly can't take any of the credit for putting this together. So, you know, thank you very much for you, Nancy. Thank you to the three of you, and I appreciate all of you taking the time. And I know Ken had to leave early, so I kind of say thank you virtually to Ken. Very
Thank
quick
you.
again to the students. As soon as we finish here, we'll take a 15-20 minute break, and then we'll meet on the link through the Moodle shell. But I want to hand things back to you, Nancy. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Eugene. I thought you would go back to bed, but no, you have to teach.
I just can't stand up right now.
Thank you so much, everyone. What a rich conversation. So thank you, Eugene. Always a pleasure to collaborate. Thank you, Denise, Kyla, Gail, and Ken. And I just put the screen here for the next events. We'll have more coming up at Railroads or virtually. So please just take a print screen of those and join Career Roads to find out more. But thank you so much. I'll work on the recording and send it to everyone shortly as well. Enjoy your day and happy World Tourism Day.
Thank you to all of you. It's been very rewarding.
Thanks, everyone. I'll see you in about 15 or 20 minutes on the Moodle shell or the Moodle shell link.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.